They said the courthouse was a place of law, but that day it became a fortress. The rain fell hard over the marble steps as Marcus Hale stood before Judge Eleanor Raines, soaked to the bone but unyielding. Every flash of lightning outside revealed a row of soldiers lining the street, their rifles glinting beneath the courthouse lights. Inside, silence reigned as the judge's voice cut through the air, firm, trembling, and final. "Mr. Hale, you are hereby ordered to leave these chambers." But Marcus didn't move. His voice was calm, steady, dangerous in its truth. "If I walk out that door, Your Honor, justice dies with me." The gavel struck like thunder. U.S. Marshal Kessler stepped forward, hand on her holster, but hesitation flickered in her eyes. Outside, sirens wailed, growing louder. A storm not just of weather, but of reckoning. No one yet knew that the building would soon be surrounded, that the nation would watch, and that justice itself would be put on trial. The storm outside deepened as Marcus was escorted toward the side corridor, his boots echoing in rhythm with the thunder above. Judge Raines remained seated, staring at the empty chair he left behind, a ghost of defiance still lingering in the air. The clerk whispered about evacuation orders, but she barely heard. Something inside her cracked. A memory of another man years ago, silenced for telling the truth. Down the hall, Marshal Kessler walked beside Marcus, her voice low. "You could have left quietly." He glanced at her, rainwater streaking his cheek like tears. "Justice doesn't whisper." As they reached the courthouse doors, a low mechanical hum filled the air. Kessler froze. Through the glass, the first armored convoy appeared, headlights slicing through the downpour. The courthouse trembled not from thunder, but from the arrival of a force meant to silence a single voice. In the courthouse lobby, chaos began to unfold. Journalists pressed against the barricades, microphones raised, the roar of generators echoing as satellite vans lined the street. The governor's spokesperson declared the courthouse a national security zone. Judge Raines descended the marble stairs, each step heavier than the last. She passed by portraits of former judges, their painted eyes following her, relics of obedience. When she reached the lower hall, she saw Marcus standing still amid the soldiers, his hands at his sides, unarmed yet unbroken. Cameras flashed, illuminating his face like a convict and a hero all at once. The people outside began chanting his name, and in that thunderous chant, the judge realized something terrifying. The law was no longer guiding the truth, it was hiding it. Outside, the storm became a living thing, wind clawing at flags, rain lashing through police barriers. Officer Leo Santiago adjusted his helmet, his youthful hands trembling on his rifle. "They say he's dangerous," someone muttered beside him. Leo looked toward the courthouse windows where Marcus stood visible through the glass, calm and unmoving. Dangerous? He looked more like a man carrying the weight of the world. The governor's voice crackled through radio static, commanding formation. But Leo hesitated. He thought of his mother watching this broadcast from home, how she once told him that courage was not pulling the trigger, but knowing when not to. His rifle lowered slightly, and in that small gesture, the storm seemed to ease for a moment, as if even nature waited for conscience to speak. Back inside, the tension reached a breaking point. Governor Delancey's call came through on the judge's secure line. His voice calm, too calm. "End this quietly, Eleanor. Remove him. The guard is there to maintain peace." But peace was already gone. Raines looked through her rain-streaked window at the soldiers outside, their shadows merging with lightning flashes. She spoke softly, almost to herself. "When did we start needing soldiers to enforce silence?" Marcus stood by the door, hands still cuffed, eyes unflinching. "When truth became dangerous," he replied. The judge's trembling hand hovered over the phone. The courthouse felt smaller now, the walls closing in. And as thunder split the sky, Eleanor Raines made her first quiet decision of rebellion. She hung up the phone. Dawn never came. The city remained cloaked in gray as the courthouse transformed into the heart of a standoff. News helicopters circled overhead, their floodlights cutting through the storm like divine judgment. Inside, Judge Rain stood before the court seal, phone lines dead, electricity flickering. National Guard units had sealed all exits. No one entered or left without authorization. Marcus sat calmly on the courtroom bench, wrists still bound, watching soldiers patrol the lobby below. "They're afraid of truth," he said softly. Kessler stood near the door, radio crackling with conflicting orders, her face caught between duty and disbelief. The courthouse, built for justice, now throbbed with the pulse of occupation. Rain hammered the roof like a drumbeat of time running out, and somewhere outside a crowd of civilians began chanting, not for order, but for freedom. The courthouse corridors filled with echoes of command, soldiers shouting, reporters pleading through megaphones, the metallic clatter of barricades locking into place. Judge Rains walked among her staff, assuring them safety while knowing there was none. In the rotunda, Kessler faced the guard's field commander, a man in his 50s with hard eyes and orders to secure all personnel. She argued jurisdiction. He cited emergency authority. "This is a courthouse," she said sharply, "not a battlefield." But the soldier's silence said otherwise. Upstairs, Marcus watched the confrontation through the railing, his face lit by flashes from outside. He whispered under his breath, "Law without conscience is just control." The sound of helicopters drowned out the reply. By afternoon, the courthouse had become an island. Streets were cordoned off, power rerouted, and the air thick with tension. Protesters outside held signs. "Let him speak," their voices drowned by rain and bullhorns. Inside, Marcus's trial files lay scattered across the floor, soaked from a broken skylight. Kessler joined him quietly. "You could still leave," she said. He smiled faintly. "You still think this is about me leaving?" Their eyes met. Two people trapped by conscience on opposite sides of the same wall. A sudden crash echoed as a tear gas canister rolled against the outer door, signaling escalation. Judge Rains watched from her chamber window, the reflection of chaos glimmering in her glasses. "So this," she whispered, "is what fear looks like in uniform." Governor Delancey appeared on every screen in the city, composed, rehearsed, smiling. "For the protection of the public," he declared, "we must maintain control." Inside the courthouse, Judge Rains listened to the broadcast echo from a small television beside the jury box. Her hands trembled as she realized the truth. He wasn't trying to control chaos. He was using it. Marcus stood behind her, still cuffed. "He is turning fear into policy," he murmured. She looked up at him, eyes sharp now, no longer uncertain. "Then we'll turn truth into resistance." Kessler entered quietly, holstering her weapon. "Ma'am," she said, "if we're going to stand for something, we should start now." The rain slowed outside, but thunder still rolled, like a heartbeat refusing to stop. Night fell again, but the siege did not sleep. Floodlights burned white across the wet courthouse facade. Judge Rains gathered her staff, dismissed them quietly, and locked the main doors from within. She returned to the bench, the seat of judgment, and looked out at the empty rows where the public once sat. "If justice must stand alone," she whispered, "then let it stand here." Marcus stood before her, uncuffed now, Kessler having made her choice. The old gavel rested on the bench between them, a relic of order now reborn as rebellion. From outside came the low rumble of tanks repositioning. Inside, 3 souls remained, one bound by law, one freed by truth, and one ready to choose between them. Midnight sank into silence, broken only by the hum of generators and distant thunder. Inside the courthouse, Judge Rains sat beside Marcus, reviewing the sealed documents he risked everything to expose. Contracts, signatures, and classified authorizations proving state complicity in civilian deaths. Her hand trembled as she traced the governor's name across the page. "This isn't just corruption," she said, voice shaking. "It's murder under paperwork." Marcus nodded. "And the truth won't survive the night unless we make it louder than their guns." Kessler entered with an idea. The courthouse's broadcast system still connected to a public emergency channel. The plan formed in seconds, desperate but righteous. They would speak directly to the nation. Rains looked to Marcus. "If we do this, there's no going back." His reply was steady, quiet, and final. "There's no justice if we don't." They moved through the courthouse's silent corridors like ghosts, past overturned chairs and empty halls echoing with distant shouts. In the media room, cables and microphones lay tangled beneath broken glass. Kessler worked fast, rerouting the emergency channel to broadcast live. Rains adjusted her robe, weary but defiant. "The oath I took was to justice," she murmured. Marcus stepped before the camera, his eyes fierce yet calm. "Then speak for it," Kessler urged, flipping the switch. The red light blinked on. The world outside went quiet as the feed activated across networks, phones, and newsrooms. The camera's lens reflected three faces: fear, faith, and fire, ready to ignite the conscience of a nation. The broadcast cut through every channel. Across homes, bars, and command centers, Americans watched a drenched federal courtroom fill their screens. Marcus's voice carried over the airwaves, not angry, but heartbreakingly steady. "My name is Marcus Hale. I served this country. I believed in its laws, until those laws killed innocent people and called it protection." Behind him, Judge Rains read from the classified documents, exposing the governor's direct authorization of the cover-up. The silence that followed was heavy, sacred. In the control room, Kessler watched the signal strength climb. Outside, the soldiers hesitated, their radios now carrying the very truth they'd been ordered to suppress. Governor Delancey's fury erupted in the state command center. "Cut the feed!" he shouted, his staff scrambling to override the signal. But it was too late. The broadcast had gone viral. Across the city, people poured into the streets, chanting Marcus's name, holding candles beneath the storm. In the courthouse, Rains continued to speak, her voice trembling but unwavering. "The law is not a shield for the powerful. It is a promise to the people." Tanks repositioned outside. The governor's orders grew frantic. But within the marble walls, the oath of conscience had found its audience. For the first time in decades, Judge Eleanor Rains was not interpreting the law. She was redefining it. The final seconds of the broadcast were pure defiance. Sirens wailed, doors rattled as troops prepared to breach. Kessler stood between them and the media room, weapon lowered but stance firm. Marcus kept speaking even as the lights flickered and the building shook. "You can arrest a man," he said, "but you can't arrest the truth." Judge Rains leaned toward the microphone. "This court is now in session, not for the law, but for the people." Then, with a deep breath, she slammed the gavel once. The power cut instantly. Screens went dark. Outside, thunder cracked as if the sky itself had delivered the verdict. And in that darkness, a nation finally listened. The silence after the blackout was suffocating. Only the steady thrum of rain against glass and the metallic clatter of boots outside broke it. Judge Rains stood frozen before the dead monitors, the gavel still warm in her hand. Marcus inhaled deeply, his voice calm. "They're coming." Kessler checked her sidearm, eyes darting toward the hallway where flashlights danced in the dark. "Then we hold." The sound of a battering ram echoed through the lower levels, shaking dust from the chandeliers. Marcus looked at the judge, then toward the locked doors. "You gave them the truth," he said. "Now we pay for it." Rain in his eyes glistened, not with fear, but with clarity. "If justice costs nothing," she whispered, "it's worthless." Outside, thunder rolled again. but now it sounded like marching boots. The breach began with a roar. The outer doors splintered under the weight of armored boots. Tear gas seeped into the halls, curling through cracks like ghostly fingers. Kessler coughed, pulling Marcus toward the courtroom. Judge Raines moved behind them, covering her mouth with a wet cloth. Over the loudspeaker came the governor's voice. Calm, rehearsed, chilling. This operation is for the preservation of order. His words echoed over chaos. Marcus stumbled, eyes watering but refused to fall. Order without justice, he gasped, is tyranny in uniform. Kessler turned, firing a warning shot into the ceiling. The sound, thunderous. Back off, she yelled to the approaching soldiers. For a brief moment, the chaos paused, as if the very walls were deciding whose side they were on. In the main courtroom, chaos became sacred defiance. Kessler sealed the heavy doors while Marcus and Raines took refuge behind the bench. Gas seeped through the vents, fogging the air with pale smoke. They'll break through in minutes, Kessler said. Marcus looked at her, the soldier who had become protector. Then let's make those minutes matter. Raines opened the old, leather-bound constitution that had rested for years on her bench. The law doesn't belong to them, she said softly. It belongs to us. She placed it on the desk between them. Together, they recited the oath, not of power but of principle. As boots thundered closer, Kessler stood firm at the door, a single barrier between violence and truth. The storm outside seemed to bow in reverence. The doors burst open in a shower of splintered wood and smoke. Soldiers stormed in, shouting orders, rifles raised. Kessler stood in their path, voice steady. No one dies here tonight. Her badge glinted in the flashing lights. The commander barked for her to stand down. She refused. Behind her, Judge Raines stepped forward, holding the Constitution high. You serve this, she said, voice echoing across the chamber. Marcus raised his chained wrists beside her. And you answer to it. For a long, fragile heartbeat, no one moved. The young soldier at the front, Leo Santiago, lowered his rifle first. Others followed. The commander shouted, but the sound drowned beneath the thunder outside. In that moment, obedience broke, and justice breathed again. The siege ended not with violence, but with silence. Soldiers lowered their weapons, their faces wet from rain and remorse. The governor's voice crackled over radios, desperate, commanding. But no one listened anymore. Judge Raines exhaled, eyes glistening. It's over. Marcus looked at her, his voice soft but resolute. No, Your Honor, it's just beginning. Outside, crowds surged past the barricades, flooding the steps of the courthouse, candles glowing like stars against the wet stone. Kessler stepped out first, lowering her weapon, followed by Raines and Marcus side by side. As dawn finally broke through the clouds, the courthouse stood scarred but alive, no longer a fortress of control, but a temple reborn in truth. Morning broke over the city like an exhausted sigh. The courthouse stood battered but upright, its broken glass glinting in the new sunlight. Reporters flooded the streets. Cameras captured the aftermath, soldiers disarming peacefully, civilians embracing strangers. Inside, Judge Raines sat alone on the bench, the Constitution still open before her. The smell of tear gas lingered, but so did something new, quiet dignity. Marcus entered, cuffs finally removed. They're saying the governor's been called to testify, he said. She looked up, weary, but resolute. Then justice has found its footing again. Kessler approached, handing her the court's official seal, cracked down the center. It's damaged, she said softly. Raines smiled faintly, but it still means something. Outside, the crowd chanted her name, but she remained silent. Justice didn't need applause. Governor Delancey faced the nation that afternoon, his voice shaking beneath the weight of exposure. Leaked documents confirmed everything. The contracts, the cover-up, the deaths. His confident tone dissolved as journalists shouted accusations. Meanwhile, in the courthouse, Raines addressed the press not with triumph, but solemnity. This was never about politics, he said. It was about the soul of justice. Marcus stood beside her, quiet but steady, his presence a living testament. When asked if she feared retribution, Rains only answered, "Fear is a choice. Silence is surrender." Across the country, millions watched, not in outrage but in reflection. For the first time, truth felt like something sacred again. That evening, the courthouse reopened its doors to the public. The rain had stopped. The air felt new, almost holy. Citizens filled the steps, leaving candles, flowers, and handwritten notes. "Truth matters, thank you." Judge Rains, "Justice isn't blind. It sees clearly now." Inside, Marcus walked the empty corridors one last time. He paused before the courtroom, touching the wood of the door like an old friend. Kessler joined him. "You could disappear now," she said softly. "I'd understand," he smiled faintly. "You don't run from light once you've stood in it." Outside, church bells rang, not for mourning, but for awakening. Judge Rains sat in her chambers, writing her final judicial statement by hand. "Justice," she wrote, "is not a verdict, but a choice we renew daily." Her desk was cluttered with letters from across the country, veterans, teachers, mothers, all thanking her for standing when it was hardest. On the windowsill, the cracked court seal rested beside a folded flag, both symbols of duty reborn through imperfection. She looked out at the city skyline. The storm had cleared, leaving streaks of pink and gold on the horizon. A knock came at her door. Marcus stepped in, holding 2 cups of black coffee. "For the long road ahead," he said. She smiled. "Justice always is." Night returned to the city, calm and clear. The courthouse, once surrounded by fear, now stood lit by hundreds of candles lining its steps. News anchors called it the night justice spoke. Inside, Judge Rains, Marcus, and Kessler stood together in the empty rotunda, the echo of the storm now replaced by quiet peace. "The law will change," Kessler said. "Maybe," Rains replied, "but conscience already has." They stepped out onto the marble steps, faces illuminated by the sea of candlelight below. For the first time, Marcus smiled, not in triumph, but in release. The camera of the world lingered on that moment, 3 souls who refused to yield, walking down from judgment into history. The storm had passed, but its echoes now shook the highest offices in the nation. Committees convened overnight. Emergency hearings filled the airwaves. Governor Delancey sat in a high-security chamber before a congressional panel, his once commanding presence reduced to a hollow shell. On the screen behind him, the footage of Judge Rains and Marcus's broadcast replayed in silence. Across town, Rains watched from her chambers, the glow of the television flickering across her tired face. "They're turning on him," Kessler said quietly. Rains didn't smile. They should have listened before the guns arrived. Marcus stood near the window, hands in pockets, eyes distant. "Truth doesn't destroy," he murmured. "It reveals." The gavel struck on the broadcast, the same sound that had once sealed his fate, now sealing the governor's. Reporters swarmed the Capitol steps, shouting questions as Delancey exited the hearing under escort. "Governor, did you authorize the silencing of witnesses?" Cameras flashed, capturing every twitch of his jaw, every glance of guilt. He didn't answer. That night, his resignation speech aired across the nation. His words were empty, the cadence hollow, but the country no longer needed him to speak. Justice had already found its voice. In the courthouse, Rains turned off the television and leaned back in her chair. "Power never admits fault," she said. Marcus replied softly, "It doesn't have to. It just has to fall." The clock ticked. The city exhaled, and somewhere outside, a single cheer rose into the night, carried on the wind like a hymn of reckoning. Days passed, but the movement didn't fade. Citizens filled streets from coast to coast, carrying banners that read "Truth is patriotism." Veterans stood beside teachers, students beside police officers, a nation stitched together by conscience. Marcus addressed the crowd outside the courthouse, his voice amplified not by technology, but by conviction. "Justice isn't what they give us," he said. "It's what we refuse to surrender." Judge Raines watched from the steps above, the crowd's roar washing over her like redemption. For once, the sound of unity was louder than the sirens had ever been. Kessler, standing beside her, whispered, "You changed everything." Raines shook her head slowly. "No, they did. The government convened a national inquiry into misuse of emergency powers." Judge Raines was summoned to testify, this time not as a defendant of justice, but as its guardian. The chamber was packed with senators, journalists, and cameras. "Your Honor," a senator began. "Why risk everything?" Raines met his gaze. "Because justice must never be convenient." Silence followed, then a standing ovation that swept through the chamber. Marcus watched from the gallery, pride and grief mingling behind his eyes. Kessler, seated beside him, whispered, "She gave them their mirror." He nodded. "Now let's see if they can look." Weeks later, the courthouse reopened officially under a new name, the Hall of Conscience. Its marble walls bore a new engraving above the entrance. "Justice, lives, and the courage to speak." Judge Raines retired that day, stepping down with grace and silence. Outside, Marcus placed a single candle at the base of the steps, the same place where the siege had begun. Kessler joined him, placing her badge beside it. "No more silence," she said. "Ever again." As they walked away, the crowd behind them began to sing, soft, united, endless. The courthouse doors closed slowly, reflecting the sunrise in their glass. A new dawn built on the ashes of obedience. Years passed, and the storm that once surrounded the courthouse became legend. Students studied it, filmmakers reimagined it, and old news footage played in classrooms as a reminder of what conscience can ignite. Judge Eleanor Raines lived quietly by the coast, away from cameras, her gavel now resting on a bookshelf between worn law journals. A young journalist arrived one morning, nervous but inspired. "Ma'am," she said, "do you regret defying the order?" Raines smiled faintly, the sea wind tugging at her gray hair. "No, the law can punish you for disobedience," she said softly, "but it can never erase truth." Outside, the waves crashed. The same sound as that long-ago thunder, timeless, unyielding, eternal. Marcus Hale devoted his life to advocacy, speaking across the country to veterans, schools, and prisons. His voice became a movement, not of rebellion, but of remembrance. "Freedom," he often said, "isn't the absence of law, it's the presence of justice." One winter evening, he visited the old courthouse. Snow blanketed the steps where once soldiers had stood. Inside, the engraved words, "Justice, lives, and the courage to speak," gleamed beneath soft lights. He placed his palm on the stone, closed his eyes, and whispered, "We did it." Outside, distant church bells rang through the night, their echoes mingling with falling snow. A song of peace finally earned. U.S. Marshal Dana Kessler left law enforcement but not service. She opened a nonprofit for whistleblowers, helping those who stood where Marcus once did. During a televised interview, she was asked if she ever feared losing her career for defying orders. "Of course," she said, smiling slightly, "but I was more afraid of losing myself." She looked into the camera, her reflection layered with images of marches, candles, and courthouse steps. "Obedience builds walls," she said. "Courage breaks them." When the broadcast ended, her words trended across the world. For one brief evening, conscience became headline news. At a university years later, a professor played the original broadcast. The moment Marcus and Judge Raines defied the order. To a lecture hall of students. "This," he said, "was the day truth became louder than fear." In the front row, a young cadet raised her hand. "Sir," she asked, "would you have done what they did?" The professor paused, staring at the flickering screen, the image of Raines holding the Constitution high. "I hope so," he replied quietly. "But the real question is, will you?" The students sat in silence, the weight of history settling over them like distant thunder. In the final moments, the film returns to the courthouse, now a national monument. Tourists wander its halls, their footsteps echoing softly over polished marble. A guide's voice narrates, "It was here that truth refused to kneel." In the main rotunda, a bronze statue stands beneath the dome. Judge Raines, Marcus Hale, and Dana Kessler side by side, looking outward. Outside, the flag waves under a clear sky. Children run across the plaza, their laughter mingling with the whisper of wind through the stone columns. The camera pans upward to the engraving above the entrance. "Justice lives in the courage to speak." Fade to white. Silence. Then softly, Marcus' recorded voice echoes one last time, "You can silence a courtroom, but never the truth."